Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello and welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, episode 124. And we are back for our second podcast of 2023 with another fantastic guest who I would say is down on my, or has been down on my dream guest list for a while. And I did post about it when we arranged this. So I'm wearing a Dinosaur Training hoodie. If you're watching on YouTube, on Facebook, maybe you'll be able to see that. So I will introduce that guest shortly. He's joining us all the way from the Pacific Northwest of America in Washington. It's 6 a.m. there. So he has got a coffee with him and he's trying to stay warm because it's about as cold there as it is here. So I'll introduce our guest in a second. But first of all, Mr. Peter Lant, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, actually. Again, similar to last week, I've been out for a walk with the boy today and everything, and it's so sunny out there. It's kind of -3 or whatever it is, but it's really sunny. And it's just lush. It's just, again, it's one of those days that is, I did a video on it earlier when I was out and about, just saying, you know, go for a walk. If you're sitting indoors today, you know, doing working away, if you're at home working away and you're shivering and all that sort of stuff, just go out for a walk because it's a glorious day. So, yeah. So I'm doing very well. Apart from now, I'm inside and I don't get to go out again for the rest of the day until it's dark. Well, there you go.
Excellent. And Mr. Paul Bassett, we know you're not having the best day on record. So if you can just pretend you're happy for now. How are you doing?
I'm not sure that's possible, James. You're asking a lot of me. No, I'm all right. I'm just you know, like trying to juggle a few things. Yeah, but I'm in the studio, the new studio that we've got, which obviously means we've got a build underway. So whilst we're training people in our existing studio, shutting it down, and also kind of running around trying to get deliveries in the new studio and fit it out, I'm currently in here. I've got thermal underwear on. I've got like a thermal top and a thermal trousers just to keep me warm. And I'm pacing around just to kind of keep my hands warm and everything. So I'm just on audio today. But yeah, it's all coming together. It's just just trying to balance everything.
Yeah. Well done for joining us on audio anyway. That's great. And our guest today is Mr. Brooks Kubik. How are you doing, Brooks?
Very well, thanks, James.
Good. It's great to see you. So I'll quickly just do a little brief intro on Brooks before I hand over to him, or how I first became aware of Brooks. I think it was probably 8 to 10 years ago. I listened to I heard Brooks on a podcast. Was really interested in what he had to say, and then went on and bought the book Dinosaur Training, which I think was first written in 1996, which is about 27 years ago. And then bought some other books and really just loved Brooks's philosophy, Brooks's ideas, the way he communicates the ideas as well. And just really everything that he stands for and that he stood for in his writing. So in a time nowadays where, you know, people are seen as content creators or influencers on social media and things like that, I mean, Brooks really has been a prolific content creator for the last, well, certainly probably 30 years. It may be more than that when we speak in a minute. Has written over 30 books and courses. You know, just very, very influential for lots of people within this space. So I won't try and do too much of a background because I want Brooks to introduce himself. But yeah, really, really happy to have Brooks on early in 2023 to help kick off the year and to help kind of hopefully motivate you and also maybe look at training in a slightly different way than you have up until now. And that's really what it did for me. It really, reading Dinosaur Training and delving into Brooks's material really kind of about 8 to 10 years ago revitalized my love of strength training and what strength training meant to me. So Yeah, thank you so much for training. Thank you so much for joining us, Brooks. Do you want to kind of maybe kick off by? I mean, I know you're 65 years of age now. You're still training daily. So there's so much for me to kind of just say. Can you just give us a little bit of a background about yourself? But do you want to kind of sum up, if you can, for the listeners, a little bit about your history, really, and your origin, and how you got involved in training, and what training has looked like throughout your life and meant to you throughout your life, if that's okay?
Certainly. I got started in physical training at age 9. And the reason that happened was I had very severe childhood asthma. My parents took me to various doctors. The doctors tried all the things that doctors try. Nothing worked. And I literally was the little boy who couldn't breathe. I couldn't run. I couldn't play games with the other kids. It finally reached the point, one of the doctors said to my parents, "This little boy is too weak to do any outdoor activities. He needs to do things like collect stamps or, play chess or checkers or things like that, but nothing more strenuous. And that's all we know what to say and all we know what to do." Well, I didn't like that. That didn't sound really good at age 9, staying indoors. And at about that time, I was reading a lot of biographies. There was a series of biographies of young Americans. And one of them was the American president, Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider, the man who believed in the strenuous life, as he wrote in a famous essay. And when I read this book, I learned that Theodore Roosevelt, who was an incredibly active, physically active man as president, he had childhood asthma as well. And what happened was his father set up a little home gymnasium with little dumbbells and barbells and parallel bars, dipping bars, chinning bars, punching bags, things like that. And Teddy and his brothers and sisters used that gymnasium. And by using it, he cured his childhood asthma and became a very fit, healthy young man, an athlete. So I thought, well, if that works for him, maybe it would work for me. So I started on an exercise program. The only thing I could do was run to school. I didn't have any barbells, weights, or anything like that. But every day I would get out and I would walk down the drive, turn the corner around the big hedges. And then when my parents couldn't see me, I'd start running. Like that. And it was absolutely horrible because I could barely make the first block, but I made myself run the whole half-mile distance to school. And gradually, as the weeks passed, it started to get a little easier. And eventually, it was no problem at all. And all of a sudden, boom, no more asthma. So that's at age 9, using physical training, not to look better or for a cosmetic purpose, but for a very goal-oriented purpose, the goal of curing the asthma. And it worked. So that taught me some fairly important lessons. One of them being that this stuff really does work. And it works in ways that are just absolutely transformative. They can change your life. So 2 years later, I'm now 83 pounds. I'm 4'11". I'm 83 pounds. I'm in 7th grade, and I'm looking forward to going to high school and playing high school sports. I wanted to play football. That was the only sport I knew about then. And I wasn't big enough to do it. So I thought, okay, the exercise stuff worked before, maybe I can try it now. So I, got my obligatory 110-pound kitty barbell set, and I started working out. I started, drinking my protein milkshakes and, all of that type of stuff. And I gained 17 pounds in about 4.5 months. So I go up to 101 pounds or 103 pounds, something like that. So I'm still a little runt as a 7th grader, but I actually had some muscle. I'd put on, I think it was 17 pounds of muscle. And the gym coach set up a wrestling mat one day, and I walked into 7th grade gym class, and there was a wrestling mat, and I started rolling around with one of the other kids, and the coach came over and he said, "Hey, let me show you some stuff." And so I became like one of the two students who would sort of demonstrate the wrestling moves that the coach showed us before class for the rest of the class. And that got me into wrestling. I discovered that I had quite an aptitude for the sport of wrestling. I won the city championship in 7th grade and 8th grade. Went to wrestle in high school. Wrestled in Illinois, in the state of Illinois, for 3 years. I won a Greco-Roman state championship in Illinois. Greco-Roman being one of the 3 wrestling styles that we contest here in the U.S. Freestyle wrestling, collegiate style wrestling, or folk style, as they sometimes call it, and Greco. So I had a very successful wrestling career in high school. Graduated from high school, go on to college, still working out. I'm always working out, very heavy into the strength training. Obviously, that had a lot to do with the success that I had in wrestling, and just kept training. Graduated from college, went to law school, graduated from law school, started the practice of law, continued training the whole time. Give you an idea of how serious I was about that. Graduated from law school in Virginia, moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where I had my first job as a lawyer. Drove all night from Virginia to get to Louisville, got there at 3:00 in the morning, unloaded a couple things, crashed. Next morning, my then wife rolls over, looks at me, says, "I'm hungry, go get some food." I said, "Sure." So I head over to McDonald's. It's 2 blocks away, to get some Egg McMuffins and coffee, right? Across the street from McDonald's, there's a little strip mall, and there's a sign on the mall, gym. Thought, really? Huh. So I go over to the mall, forget the coffee, forget the Egg McMuffins, right? I'm after the important stuff. So I find this little hole in the wall gym in the basement of this strip mall. It's not open, but I knock on the door, and the manager is there. And he opens up, and I'm like, wow, this is great. It's an old black iron gym, no chrome, just, Olympic barbells, power racks, dumbbells up to 120, great place. So the first thing I do is buy a membership. Then I go buy the Egg McMuffins and the coffee. I get back, and my wife is like, "What took you so long?" "Oh, nothing." "Oh, nothing. Don't ask." So literally the first thing I bought when I moved to Louisville was a membership at that gym. So anyhow, I continued training. About my late 20s, I was sort of thinking, maybe I'm getting too old for this. I'm kind of stuck. I haven't been able to increase my weights. Haven't been able to really, get going, push forward. And 2 things happened. One is a retired metal worker welded together this great power rack at the gym. And I decided to really seriously start power rack training. And the second thing was, there was a big push in the United States for drug-free powerlifting competition. And I had always been drug-free. I very strongly believed in, and do believe in, drug-free sport. And I thought, okay, well, if you believe in it, you ought to support it by competing. So I simultaneously started power rack training in a very serious, massive, aggressive way. And I started focusing on training for powerlifting competition and bench press competition, which is sort of a subdivision of powerlifting. And about 2 years later, I was enormously stronger. I'd put on another 20 pounds of muscle at that point in time. I was weighing 195 pounds. And in powerlifting, first championship I was in, I won the state championship in powerlifting and bench press competition. And I then won a regional championship in the bench press, and then competed in a national championship in the bench press, and I won it. And it was just like, holy mackerel. That was in my weight group, my weight class and my age group. I was in what was called the sub-masters division for guys who are old enough to know better, but still down. So I competed in age 33 to 35, and over the course of several years in 2 different competitions, I won 5 national championships in the bench press. So, that proved to me that what I was writing about, and you held up earlier my book, Strength, Muscle, and Power.
Mm.
Now, unfortunately, out of print, but we hope to bring it back in a Kindle version. But the first 2 chapters in that outline the training program that I was using at that point in time, the Power Act training, which was just amazingly effective. Really old school, really heavy duty, really hardcore. And it was stuff that worked, stuff that made me very, very strong. So a guy named Stuart McRobert was publishing a magazine called Hard Gainer. And I was reading the magazine, and I sent in a letter about how much I liked the magazine and how it inspired me to train harder than ever. Stuart ran the letter as a 2-part article. And the next thing I know, I start writing for Hard Gainer and wrote, gosh, I don't know, probably 15 to 20 articles for Hard Gainer. Had a lot of people sending me letters. This was back in the days before the internet, snail mail letters about how much they enjoyed the articles. And eventually I started to put together a book about my training philosophy. And that book became Dinosaur Training, of which you also have a copy. Dinosaur Training, Lost Secrets of Strength and Development. And that was published in early 1996. I published it myself. And that became essentially an international bestseller in the strength training community. I mean, it just took everything by storm and really helped focus and change people's ideas on what training was all about. In Dinosaur Training, again, because of my interest in drug-free training and trying to promote drug-free training methods and make drug-free cool, I look back to the people that I knew were absolutely drug-free, which is the people who were very big and very strong and very muscular and well-developed before steroids, which means essentially, at the very least, before 1960, and really back into the 50s and earlier, because steroids started to become a problem in sport in the 1950s. The Russians were using them in the 50s. Athletes from other countries were becoming aware of them. And so if you're looking at when were people legitimately not using drugs, the timeline is before the 60s or really before the 50s. So I was writing about old-time strongmen. And what I found was that if you look at their training methods, they did a lot of things that back then in 1996, people weren't doing anymore. They lifted heavy, awkward objects, sandbags, barrels. They used thick-handled barbells. They used very, very heavy weights in their training. They didn't focus on pumping up with light weights. They focused on, really heavy maximum effort lifts. So I wrote about that. I wrote about it in a way that I think made it all very exciting, fun, and interesting. And it helped to create a whole new way of training. And a lot of the things that you see in gyms nowadays, you see, for example, people doing the farmer's walk. That's an exercise nobody did from the old-time strongmen who did it regularly as a regular part of their training, did it. It dropped out of fashion sometime in the 40s or 50s. By the 1960s, no one did it. Well, people do it all the time now. You go to any gym, you see people carrying stuff around, doing a farmer's walk, or what they sometimes call a suitcase walk. But that came back into fashion because I wrote about it in 1996 in Dinosaur Training. And now it's like everybody does it. So it's not unique or uncommon, but back when I was resurrecting it, it had a revival. And the same is true of using thick bars, doing a lot of grip training, using sandbags, lifting rocks, lifting barrels, all kinds of things that people sort of take for granted now, really are the result of that book in a large way. So I'm very happy about that, very proud of it.
Just before we came on, Brooks, I made a few notes, and I wrote down kind of, like I say, I read Dinosaur Training the first time probably eight to 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly, but I made a list of I just put 6 bullet points down of things that off the top of my head I remember kind of that book taught me or reintroduced to me, or was a totally new concept. And the 6 points you've almost just worded them there that were so unique was carries, fat bars or thick bars, low reps, abbreviated training, which obviously means, which we can discuss a bit later on, compound lifts, and awkward objects. So all those things that you just mentioned, they're just, they're, and I think now the world of kind of strongman and things like that, where you have like world's strongest man competitions and strongman competitions and things, a lot of that now as well is bringing in more popularizing, I suppose, things like Atlas stones and yoke carries and farmers walks and drags and pushes and these big and obviously deadlifts and overhead presses and squats and things like that. Was this just a way that you were, because of the nature of the gyms that you were training at, like you said, this kind of basement gym under the strip mall, which was very, I suppose, kind of free weights and basic, and like a kind of a dungeon type gym, was this interest of all of this sort of more basic, back to basics sort of training? Did you always have that since you started training, or was this, because I know you're a real kind of historian as well, aren't you, of strength and physical culture and training, or did that kind of real interest in the history come a bit later?
Well, I think the easiest way to explain it is that when I was growing up, you didn't have strongman contests, you didn't have CrossFit. You had a very limited number of things that you could do if you were interested competitively in training. One was bodybuilding, one was powerlifting, one was Olympic weightlifting. Now, Olympic weightlifting requires lifting platforms, lifting shoes, Olympic lifting bars, and you need someone to teach you the technique. At that time in the United States, there was very, very little Olympic lifting. So very few opportunities. If you didn't live somewhere where there was someone who would, retired, a former Olympic lifter, a weightlifter, who could teach you the form and technique, be your coach, you couldn't do it. Okay, so that was off the boards for most people. And it wasn't a very big deal because the US was, at that point in time, not very competitive internationally in weightlifting. It just wasn't a big draw. Powerlifting was more of a draw. It really got off the ground in the 60s, was gaining a lot of momentum into the 70s and so on. So that was something you could do. And that was relatively approachable because the lifts are easier. Bench press, squat, deadlift, they're more accessible. You can train for them with basic equipment, power rack, Olympic barbell, you're good to go. So that was a sport that attracted a lot of people and attracted me. The other sport was bodybuilding. And in bodybuilding, you had at that point in time, essentially 2 camps, AAU bodybuilding and IFBB bodybuilding. And the AAU tried to have they all espoused to be drug-free. Whether they were or not, who knows? But we all certainly have our suspicions, don't we? There were actually a lot of writers, influential writers, who basically said, don't get involved in the bodybuilding side of things because it's drug-based, There's all the politics of the sport. You know, who's the best bodybuilder? Who's got the best physique? Well, it's a matter of opinion, a matter of impression. So you have, you know, the personal opinions come into play, and you know, it was something where it's like, doesn't sound that interesting. So I tended to follow people who wrote for those who were interested in sheer raw strength training, which at that point in time in the US was primarily powerlifting. So I followed those people, and I had followed those people from the time that I was, you know, 7th, 8th grade, just starting to read about this stuff. So I always had that interest in mind. Of course, the other thing was when I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, and in high school, wrestling was my sport of choice. I mean, I've often said I basically lived either in the weight room or on the wrestling mat from junior high to high school, and through high school. And, you know, I was really, really focused on the wrestling. That was a critically important thing. So to the degree that there was anything out there about training for sport and to improve in sport, to build strength for sport, that was what I focused on and what I read. So that was my background. Then as I began writing more and studying more, when I was writing for Hard Gainer magazine, for example, I really started to look at what the old time strongmen were doing. And I found that it was really cool, interesting stuff. And I actually ended up leaving that old hole in the wall dungeon gym and setting up training quarters in my basement, because I was doing things that they didn't want me to do in the gym, like bring my thick bars. You know, I had a 2-inch bar, you know, a 3-inch bar, 7 foot long, sized for Olympic plates. And I would bring them to the gym, and, you know, they were just like, hey, you don't need to do that. You know, you're weirding people out. This is, you know, and I couldn't do things like heavy carries. They didn't want you to do heavy carries. I couldn't lift barrels. I wanted to try lifting barrels. I couldn't lift sandbags. So I set up shop at home and I started doing all of those things. And once again, you know, it's like every time I was trying something new and different and really hardcore, like when I really got into power rack training in my late 20s, zoom, big jump in strength. When I started doing the Dinosaur Training type workouts, boom, big jump in strength. You know, it's so
I'd be interested to just quickly jump in and ask a question, because I know you've asked. There's so many points here that, and I could probably ask about 10 questions in a row. But there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that really jumped out at me. I mean, for many of our listeners who aren't really aware of the history of strength training, there is this almost, for many people, almost like a dark ages where there's glimpses of information and these records and these kind of myths of what people could do. I mean, we've got an ex-guest on our podcast, David Cohen, who's going around Ireland finding the old lifting stones. And these were great feats of strength. And all we have is either word of mouth or kind of books, which are often not that easy to read. So it's very captivating, but it takes a certain kind of mindset to get into that world. And I think there's a second question that goes to that. As you mentioned, and you brought it up quite a few times, is this is pre-drugs. I mean, we're recording this in December 2022, and one of the big controversies in the fitness industry at the moment is the Liver King, who is a social media influencer, a supplement owner, company owner, and someone who has denied using drugs. And so it's really difficult in this modern era to separate ourselves from what actually is possible and how people actually develop the kind of physiques that we see as strength and we see as strong. And I certainly, when I started reading your books, I started getting to that glimpse of how that is done. So, I mean, I suppose there's two questions there. The first one is like, how did you even begin to start finding out about this stuff? And how did you start piecing it together into some kind of coherent plan that other people could follow based on the fact there's no videos or anything like that, or workout plans that are easy to follow? And secondly, what do you make of all the current controversies around the steroid use of a lot of popular figures at the moment?
Well, go to question number one. How did I piece it together? There is a wonderful man, a very good friend of mine named Bill Hinburn, who lives in Michigan here in the United States. And about 1969, I believe, Bill started a business of selling rare old weight training books, magazines, and courses. And I started buying stuff from him. I think I was in either 8th or 9th grade when I first bought a book from him. I bought a training course written by Reg Park, the famous multi-time Mr. Universe winner. So I had always been using Bill's materials as a resource. Bill has a business, it's an online business, superstrengthbooks.com, where he sells reprint editions of old training courses. And so, for example, if you want to know the training courses that came with the Milo barbells that you would buy in 1910, he's got the courses. He's reprinted them. And you can read them and you can say, they did this and this and this and this. I remember talking with Kim Wood, another friend, strength coach for the Cincinnati Bengals professional football team for about 25 years. He and I were talking about these old barbell courses, and he said, if you look at the photos of the guys in the course and look at the exercises that they were doing, you can see how their physical development is different from that of modern athletes. Their shoulders are different because they do these exercises. Their midsection development, particularly their obliques, are different, much more developed because they do this exercise. Their forearm and grip, their forearm development, their wrist development is much different, much more massive because they do these exercises. So that's an example of how, using resources like Bill Hinburn to get to old courses, books, and magazines, and then studying the photos and reading, the exercise routines and the descriptions of what they would do and so on, you start to piece all this together, and you sort of like, that's what they did, and that's the result. So that was really how I put it together over a period of, many years of trying to sort of pull all this together. And then when I wrote Dinosaur Training is a big book. It's a little book in a sense. It's 220 pages, but in terms of typed manuscript pages, because again, this was before the internet and before computers. These were typed, manual typewriter typing pages. 450 pages of paper went into that book. So to pull that together, that was kind of like an education in itself. Just pulling it together was sort of creating an encyclopedia of training. So that I think is the answer to the first question. Now the answer to the second question, influencers and competitive people, drug users. My personal opinion, and this may be unfair to certain influencers or public figures or athletes and their coaches, but my personal opinion, for whatever that is worth, is that the vast majority of elite athletes, extremely well-developed bodybuilders, the influencers who you look at them and your eyes just pop out of your heads, people with phenomenal development where it just appears to be unreal. My personal opinion is that that is due to drug use, and or it is due to some of the modern supplements that essentially are drugs that metabolize into drugs when taken. And I think that drug use is so ubiquitous in sport that most people know that, accept it, and don't really care about it. So, there are controversies back and forth. Does so-and-so use drugs? Can you achieve such and so with or without drugs? That's just internet fodder for people to do blog posts and, get likes and looks and hits and controversy and so on. The more people argue about that sort of thing, the more the media machine just, bounces up and down. What I do is ignore, again, this is my personal preference, my personal choice. I ignore all of the modern stuff. I don't pay attention to modern media figures, influencers. I don't read modern magazines. I don't read modern books. I don't look at the blogs. I just don't pay attention to it. If you asked me who won the Mr. Olympia contest this past year, if there was one, I assume there was, but I don't know. I don't know. I literally do not care. And I don't follow Olympic weightlifting. I don't follow powerlifting. I don't follow any sports. Strange as that seems, because sports were such a major part of my life when I was younger, and I was a very good competitive athlete. I just don't follow that because of the drugs, along with all the other commercialization. I mean, sport is extremely politicized, commercialized. It's a money machine, and I'm just not interested in that. I don't care. What I care about, and this is a long ways of getting to I think the important message for the listeners and the viewers, what I care about is my own training. I care about getting up every day, throwing on my sweats, bundling up, going out to the beach, lifting a heavy log and carrying it for 2 miles. That's important to me. I don't care what anyone else is doing. They can do other stuff, and that's wonderful. They can take whatever, they can sell whatever, they can promote whatever. Makes no difference to me. And that's, I think, the most important mindset. And it's perhaps the most important message of all my books and courses. I mean, the basic theme is do it yourself. Do it for yourself. There's a chapter in Strength, Muscle, and Power, barbell, basement, lifter. And that's kind of the focus of my message. You can train at a gym, but even if you do, you train by yourself for yourself. You can train at home by yourself for yourself. You can train outside the way I do now, by yourself for yourself. That's the important thing about physical training. And physical training is a journey of self-improvement. You do that by challenging yourself, by saying, I can do this. I want to be able to do this. How do I get from here to here? Having trouble with the camera here. How do I get from here to here? Okay. And you focus on that, and the other stuff just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. It will not make me stronger if I pay attention to influencer A or B or C. If I, there are people who know a particular sport inside out. They know all the statistics for professional baseball players, batting averages, earned run averages, everything. I assume the same is true in soccer.
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, do you know people who know all those stats? They have all that information in their head. They're walking encyclopedias, but they can't play the sport.
Yeah.
Or they don't play the sport. you have fantasy football leagues, which is sort of the definition of not playing the sport. You're having fun, you're engaging, it's a fine thing to do. A lot of people love doing it, but it's not the physical training. And I've always focused on the physical training, physical culture. The word physical is really important because it means you are doing things. You're not watching other people do things. You guys are what, 8 hours behind me?
Eight hours ahead of you.
Okay, so you've probably, I don't know if you've been training people or not, but you may have had like 4 workouts today, 5 workouts, 6. All 3, I'm assuming, have gotten your workout in today.
Absolutely.
If you haven't, you're going to do it right after the podcast. I'm going to work out in 3 hours. That's what the focus is. The focus is on working out. And for older listeners, make a jump, because I know that a lot of your listeners, viewers, are, say, what, 40 and up?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the critical thing at that age is not to focus on what 20-year-old elite athletes do. That doesn't make any difference for you. What you need to do is to focus on what works best for you at age 40, 50, 60, things that you can actually do and survive without breaking your body apart, which is all too easy to do as you get older. Okay. You need to focus on regular common sense training that you can do on a consistent basis. And you need to focus on doing the things that will make you stronger, healthier, more robust. Ask me about my reader who wrote in about his PSA scores.
Tell us about your reader who wrote in about their PSA scores.
I got an email the other day from a guy in his mid-60s who had blood work done, and his PSA score dropped by, for people who don't know, that's related to prostate health, which men in their 60s and 70s tend to pay attention to, right? So his PSA score, you want a lower score, his PSA score dropped by like a third. And the only change in his life, it wasn't drugs, it wasn't medicine, it wasn't diet. He started to do 2 exercises religiously, very hard, every 3 days. One of them was kettlebell swings. The other one was hip belt squats. That was it. 3 months later, boom.
Right.
It's more important than what an influencer can sell you. Go ahead.
Everything you've just, right. I'm going back to you reading Teddy Roosevelt's book, because I've written down here, you had childhood asthma, and you're not your diagnosis. You get a diagnosis at a time. You're not that diagnosis. That is where you are at that moment in time. And I've also written down influence. And influence is huge, because your parents would have been influenced by the doctor who told you that. And you said yourself, you'd get around the hedge and then you'd run, so your parents didn't see, because they'd stop you. And that's influence. And this is in the 60s, you were saying, I think, wasn't it? So, doctor tell parents that, and that's the way it goes. And then you also said something about how you were in your late 20s, and I've written that down, and you were getting a bit too old for lifting and stuff like that, which is a load of rubbish, because like we talk to guys in their 40s and beyond, and we do that. But the other thing I've got a guy who's 60, who's just joined I train like mainly groups, but they all do different things, but just in a group. And after the first month, he's been basically doing some presses, some one-legged stuff, because he struggles to stand on one leg without wobbling around. And he's a runner and a rower. And I'm like, well, if you're out running and you can't stand on one leg, let's deal with that, shall we? Because he's got a sore knee. Funny that, isn't it? So, we're doing one-leg stuff, and then just general strength stuff, pressing stuff above his head, doing some squats, just normal stuff. And he asked after about a month, he goes, is there any kind of variety to this? Do we do like other stuff? And I was like, we can do. but if you want results, we're gonna do this until we need to do something else. So that's the other thing about influence, I think, and what you're saying about just doing what is good for you and forgetting everything else. Because then you go and look on social media, or whatever, oh, this person's doing this, I might go and do that. It's the shiny object syndrome, isn't it? So people don't tend to stick it. So they go, I tried that and it didn't work. Well, how long did you try it for? I did it for 2 weeks. It's like, do it for a year and then get back to me. So I think there's a huge message in that, and influence is the running theme through all of that, I think. And you now, I mean, I don't know what the rest of your training looks like. I've seen on it's funny because I've seen it on social media, which we're saying don't follow social media, but like, there's nothing wrong with it if you are getting good information from it. And I've seen you like outside your garage when it's cold with your the wooden you've just got a couple of bits of plywood or something, haven't you? And your barbells and stuff like that, and then carrying the logs along the beach and everything. I mean, that's mentally good for you as well. I mean, I know lifting stuff is mentally good for you anyway, but just being out on a beach in nature, walking around with a log is, it just looks idyllic. It looks great. So yeah, I think that's a huge message for everybody.
I was just going to say, Brooks, as well. I think that what you were talking about there, that's one of the things that the book Dinosaur Training, when I first read it, kind of gave me. It was that you don't need to make things complicated. You make things as simple as you can. And you, like you say, like Pete just said, the shiny object syndrome. There's so many things going on in social media, but if you just stick to the basics and you do the basics religiously and properly and consistently for months and years on end, you're going to get stronger, and there's all these gadgets out there and things that and people are marketers, people have to sell things and try and come up with new ideas. And really the basics are what work, aren't they? And well, when you proved it with your, the way you were training with a power rack and Olympic barbell in a kind of a basement, and you were, setting records and winning championships and things just through very, very, I think people like the distraction from doing the hard stuff. Would you agree with that? Is that something people look for? Distractions when things get too hard. They look for a different way when things get hard. I think that's kind of maybe what it is.
Well, that's absolutely true. And to your point about my training when I was competing in powerlifting, I did a total of about 6 or 8 exercises over the course of a week. 3 different workouts, and each workout I did 2, maybe 3 exercises, same exercises week after week after week after week. And the point is, you need that repetition. You need to be doing the same thing over and over because you get better at it. If you're a boxer, in boxing, there are 4 punches. Mm-hmm. But boxers practice those 4 punches over and over constantly, and they develop amazing skill and ability. It's the same with building strength. You focus on a small number of things and you get really good at them. And that's how you build true functional strength. Then at that point, you can do something else, but it's only after a process where you've been focusing on it for, months, if not years. So that's really important. That sort of ties into Peter's point about the mental health, or the mental aspects of training and what training does. Training makes you physically strong, but it also makes you mentally strong, and that is incredibly important. And I'm going to tell you something. Which one of you guys is the oldest?
That would be me. I know it's hard to believe.
I never guessed.
Well, that would be me.
Okay, so you're the oldest, but you're probably 20 years younger than I am.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay, roughly, ballpark. So I'm going to tell you something. When you're in your 60s, life is different, things are different, and people are different. The people that you know now who are aggressive go-getters, take on the world, they shrink, they reduce, they get tired. They don't get outside, they don't have any sun on their skin, they get pale, and they just kind of look old. And they lose that desire to do stuff, to get up and go out and do stuff. They lose the desire and the ability to be a little bit uncomfortable and go through a little bit of pain and just push themselves. It's just too hard. They just don't want to do it. You have to fight that tendency. And the way to do it is by intelligent but challenging training.
Yeah.
Intelligent but challenging. One thing I like about the workouts that I do when I go out to the beach, it's usually in the wintertime, it's a cold walk, a cold, brisk walk to the beach. And on the beach, it is either cold and brisk or downright freezing. Sometimes I train on the beach when we have gale force winds, 20 or 25 mile an hour winds coming in, sometimes gusting to 40 miles. The salt spray off the ocean is coming in, the sand is blasting your face. You're chattering because it's cold, but you know what? It's actually a good thing for you because it keeps you tough, as opposed to being comfortable. There's a John Wayne movie, and John Wayne, the great American hero in the movies, the gunfighter, the gunslinger. When he was older, he would always have a younger guy in as the sidekick, or sometimes 2 or 3 younger guys as the sidekick. And there's a scene where John Wayne and this younger guy have rescued this young woman, and they're out in the prairie somewhere, and the bad guys are after them or something. I don't know what, but they're camping out for the night, and they're all 3 in their little knapsack, their little sleeping bags. And John Wayne, wakes up the next morning, and this young woman is like huddled against him for warmth. She's rolled her little sleeping bag over so she can huddle against John Wayne to stay warm. And he says, "Why don't you go bother him?" pointing to the young guy. And she says, "Because he's young. You're old and comfortable." Okay. And that's the thing you don't want when you're in your 60s or your 70s. You don't want to be old and comfortable. You want to do things that are sometimes uncomfortable. Not that they're dangerous or that they're going to hurt you or cause injuries, but you need to kind of push through that comfort zone, whatever it is. In my case, it's going out to the beach, lifting logs, carrying logs, dragging logs. I like doing that, because that challenges me. It gets me out of my comfort zone. It's something I've never lived in a place where I could do that before. It's a fun thing to do, and it kind of keeps me young. It's that eye of the tiger thing from the Rocky movies.
Is Dinosaur Training like punk rock for you?
Yeah,
Is it kind of like? Is that? Yeah, it sounds. I think you need a bit of punk rock at whatever age,
Yeah. It's when you stop listening to the right kind of music, things change. So you always want to keep listening to the right kind of music, whatever it is for you. And you want to keep training, and you want to keep training in ways that are going to keep you young. That varies from one person to another. And that's one reason why there's no right way to train. There's nothing that I cannot put out, here's my list of all the the 10 best exercises, the single best workout, the one thing that works for everybody. I can't do that. You guys can't do that. Nobody can do that. It doesn't exist. And one reason is people are different, not only physically, but psychologically and emotionally. And what they need, what they really need to build that physical strength and to build that mental and emotional strength is something that resonates with them, something that's a challenge. It's different for everybody. As trainers, you are all very skilled in matching the person to the training. Peter, you were talking about how you train people in a group, but they don't all do the same thing. Absolutely. Which is an example of what I'm throwing out there. You have to style it to the person. And when people train themselves, they have to look for things that really interest, challenge, motivate them. Something where you say, I want to do that. It's different for all of us. I've never gotten into kettlebells. I just was, I was doing other things. I never really got into them. A lot of people love them, swear by them, use them all the time, get great results with them. That's wonderful. I just have never done it. Maybe I will sometime, but in the meantime, there's a lot of other interesting things to do. And yet for other people, they walk in, they see those kettlebells, they're like, wow, I want to do that. They see someone do a Turkish get up, they're like, I want to do that. I want to learn how to do that.
I suppose the interesting question is, the thing about some of the exercises that you do and you talk about, people don't really have a context to evaluate exactly what strength is with them. It's difficult to someone knows if you pick a heavy weight off the floor, like a deadlift, or you put it on your back and squat it or whatever, or you press something overhead, people are quite, in the traditional lifts that we teach in the gyms, people are quite aware of what strength means with those. But things like the bent press or using some of the more kind of obscure grip strength things or dumbbell system, all these kind of approaches, they're very difficult for people to get their head around. How would you explain exactly the level of strength some of these old time strongmen, if we use a more colloquial term for them, were doing? How do they compare to our modern training methods, and how do they compare to our modern athletes?
Some of the things the old timers did, the very best, the elite of the old timers, and I'm talking about men who lifted in the 1890s, 1910, 1920. Hermann Gerner, a German strongman who flourished in the 1920s, did a one-hand deadlift with 727.5 pounds. It's one hand, 1920s, 727.5 pounds. Gerner worked in a munitions factory building bombs, right? Okay. One day, for a joke, he apparently wanted to play a joke on his boss. He lifted up I think it was a 300 kilos, so 660 pound bomb, and put it on the man's desk single-handedly. Okay. Now, how does that compare to an elite modern athlete? Well, show me an elite modern athlete in any sport who can do either of those things. Then you've got Arthur Saxon doing a bent press with, I think his top weight was 385 pounds, lifting that weight from the floor to overhead with one hand. No one else has ever done that. That's the oldest lifting record that has never been passed or surpassed by anyone. Now, of course, that's in part because very few people trained the bent press from say the 1920s or 30s up until it started to become somewhat in vogue again in recent years. But even so, no one's ever approached that or done anything like that. The old timers were extremely strong. And one of the reasons I think is that people tended to be stronger back then. There was a lot of manual labor. People worked on farms. They worked in mines. They did a lot of lifting, a lot of carrying, a lot of work with pickaxes and hammers and shovels. And they were just naturally strong. And of those, the ones who were really strong were the ones who gravitated towards lifting. And sometimes they just became phenomenally strong, particularly in grip strength and shoulder strength. So, there were some incredibly powerful, strong people. There also were some incredibly well-developed people. I mean, if you want to know what a drug-free physique looks like, look at people who flourished ages ago, such as, for example, George Hackenschmidt. There's some excellent photos of George Hackenschmidt, very, very muscular. Billy Block, Eugene Sandow, Sig Klein, what was his name? Oh gosh, I'm losing it. It'll come back to me, obviously, the second the show's over. But I mean, there are so many really well-developed physiques from that era that absolutely demonstrate you can have a magnificent physique without drugs. And you won't weigh 300 pounds with 0% body fat, or whatever the numbers are that they throw out for competitive bodybuilders nowadays. But you will absolutely look like a magnificently developed athlete. And
why did they fall out of favor? I mean, why did all these exercises why are they no longer the kind of go-to exercises for people? I mean, what changed?
Well, the world changes and the influencers change. The influencers from the 1890s, 1900s, 1910, 1920 were professional strongmen. And professional strongmen did certain exercises that looked incredibly impressive to an audience, such as lifting a heavy weight overhead with one hand, such as specializing in grip strength so that you could lift a 2-inch barbell or a 3-inch barbell or a 2-inch dumbbell or a 3-inch dumbbell overhead, so that when the guy from the audience came up to give it a try, everybody would say to the strongman, you're not strong. We got a guy here. He's the strongest man in our town. He can lift that. And strongman would have to say, come on up. So the guy comes up and he's a big blacksmith or mine worker or whatever. And he tries to lift the strongman's weight and he can't even get it off the ground because it has a thick handle. Strongman leans over. He's practiced with this. He's developed the grip strength so he can lift it. Boom, pops it overhead. Everyone's amazed. And they think, gosh, strongest guy in town couldn't even budge that weight. This guy must really be super strong. He must be the strongest man in the world. So the strong men and what they did in their stage acts influenced what people did. Then, starting in the late 20s, moving into the 30s, you started to have the sport of Olympic weightlifting become very popular internationally, and increasingly more so in the United States after the Olympic Games were held in Los Angeles in 1932. And people actually saw weightlifting in action by elite people from Europe who came over to compete in the Olympics. So they were like, wow, we want to do that. Well, Olympic weightlifting started out as 5 lifts, 1-hand snatch, 1-hand clean and jerk, 2-hand snatch, 2-hand military press, 2-hand clean and jerk. Almost immediately, they cut it down to 3 lifts: 2-hand clean and press, 2-hand snatch, 2-hand clean and jerk. And everybody was focused on those 3 lifts. So now the older lifts, the grip strength stuff, the bent press, start to fall out of favor because people are focused on the Olympic lifts. In the late 1950s, there started to be more of an emphasis on what they called the strength set: squat, curl, bench press. They then sort of meshed that into what we now call powerlifting. They dropped the curl and replaced it with the deadlift. So you had squat, bench press, deadlift as part of powerlifting competition coming into vogue in the 60s. At the same point in time, in the United States at least, I think in England too, to a large degree, Olympic weightlifting sort of falls out of favor for reasons that I mentioned earlier. It just wasn't that accessible, and the US wasn't good at it internationally. So young guys started looking for other ways to compete, and they competed in powerlifting. Okay, now you're like 3 or 4 iterations past what was being done 100 years earlier. And the lifts from 100 years earlier were almost completely forgotten. So, so things go, they go in cycles. Olympic weightlifting internationally may be bounced out of the Olympics because of all the drug scandals. There may be no more weightlifting in the Olympics. So what's going to happen then? Don't know. Now, of course, we also have, strongman has become popular. Strongman is very popular in the US and in the UK. So that influences what people do. CrossFit has influenced what people do. And 10 years from now, if we come back and do a podcast 10 years from now, people will be doing other things that no one is even thinking about right now. It's just, that's just the nature of the beast.
I think I'm just kind of formulating this in my head now, but I think technology has a part to play as well, as in like, and I don't mean technology as in like electronics and everything, but just straps for lifting and belts and all of that sort of stuff, which the old-time strongmen just started when they were young. And they were all at their prime when they were getting to the late 30s, early 40s, weren't they? Because they'd just been lifting for 20, 30 years.
Yes.
Consistently, and they got strong. Whereas people now in their prime, you'd say, in the Olympics and what have you, are kind of in their late 20s, early 30s, I would say. Which is
younger.
Yeah, and younger, which is because it's kind of like a fast track, which everyone's looking for these days, isn't it? And it's like, if you just put the effort in, the hard yards, you get to where you're going, which is what we say a lot on this podcast as well, because obviously we're talking to people who've already gone past the start point, if you want to call it that, like when you're 15, 16 or whatever, and then maybe he's in the 40s now. And it's like, well, you can still start there and build strength. It'll, and just do that for 20 years. And by the time you get into your 60s, towards your 70s, you'd be stronger than everyone else in your demographic. But start now. And I think that's a huge thing, rather than go down the gym and pick up 50 kilos on a deadlift with a belt around you and straps and all that sort of stuff. It's like, just start lighter and do it and build it up. I think that's a huge message for people as well. Because actually all these things tend to, like we've said, why haven't people been able to do what we could do 120, 130 years ago? Why can't people do that now? And it's because, well, in my head, it's because of that, because we try to cheat it.
I think there's a lot of merit to that. The other thing is you have a lot of people who get into training do it for cosmetic reasons. They want to look better. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's always been a draw of physical training, and you do end up looking better. But the most important thing for older trainees is yes, you have improved appearance, but it's improved function.
Yeah.
You know, and you can start at 0 at age 50 or 60 or 70, and you can double your strength. You can probably triple your strength. You may even be able to increase your strength, at least in some ranges of motion in some exercises, by 4 times or 5 times. And think about what that does for your ability to get through life, to just do simple things that other people your age cannot do. You can probably go from absolute beginner to twice as strong at any age in 3 months or less.
Yeah.
And the reason is, you know, if you're an absolute beginner, your maximums are pretty light. You can double those. You can become twice as strong with progressive strength training. Simple, consistent, progressive training. 3 workouts a week, half an hour a workout. Train at home. You don't need any fancy equipment. You know, you can do it with body weight exercises. You can do it with sandbags. You can do it with dumbbells, kettlebells, whatever. Very, very simple. Someone can come to where you guys provide training, train with one of you guys 3 times a week and go from 0 to twice as strong in, I would say, 3 months. If they're, they go from a beginner, twice as strong in 3 months, and another 3 months, they double that level of ability. At that point, in terms of functionality, you're just off the charts. You've now moved into the top 10% for your age group. And if you keep training in 2 years, you'd be in the top 1%. There was a study done, what was it? I think it's the American Council on Exercise. Some group gave a recommended number of minutes of physical activity every day that they said was a minimum, or maybe they said it was ideal, but it was like everybody should get, and I think it was 30 minutes a day. Okay. And by exercise, they meant something, walking. So, the minimum, let's say, is 30 minutes a day of walking. Then they asked people, do you do that? Okay. And virtually everybody said, oh yeah, all the time, of course. And then they put Fitbits on the people and they found out, no, only something like, 1 out of 10, some incredibly small percentage actually got in that minimum level, just like 30 minutes of activity a day. Most people didn't even get that. Okay. So knowing that, if you're 50, 60, 70, and you get your 30 minutes of exercise a day, and it doesn't have to be like super hard, demanding, knock you flat on your back exercise. It can be just going for a walk. Okay. You get your 30 minutes in, you're in the top 10%. If you do it consistently for 1 year, you're so far ahead of everyone else, it's not even funny. And if instead of walking, you're doing things that involve resistance training, or you're doing a combination of walking or other cardio or aerobic work plus resistance training, you've now moved up into the elite level. And then you stay there with a relative minimum of effort. It's not that hard to move into the top percentile of everyone in your age group, because most people, face it, are just in horrible shape.
We had a guest on recently called Mark Lewis, who said, and he's I think he's 49, but he does a lot of things like triathlons and ultra marathons and things like that. And he changed his kind of lifestyle fairly late in life. I think when he was in his 40s, so he's just been training seriously for, say, the last 10 years. And he said that his goal is always when he goes into something, when he tries something new, is to be above average, and that's the initial thing, just be above average. And then if you're above average at all of these different things, like you say, and then you look at your age group, you can become elite. This is one of the things he was talking about, so no, I think it's fantastic. And I think that message of, like Pete mentioned, and you've just explained, Brooks, that, if you are in your 50s, your 60s and your 70s, it's certainly not too late. And if you are a beginner, you can have massive impact on your life, a year from now, 2 years from now, a decade from now. So it's never too late to start, is it?
It's never too late to start. And the thing to do for anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you're not training, start now. And by that, I mean literally right now, today. Second the podcast is over, it's time to do some push-ups, time to do some body weight squats, time to go for a walk, whatever. But start training now and keep at it. And you just absolutely won't believe the results. I mean, the research is coming in right and left about the health benefits of physical strength. One of the things that correlates with longevity to a higher degree than anything else, grip strength. Strong grip, you live longer. Nobody knows exactly why that is. The strong grip might be a proxy for strength throughout the body, for being more active, don't know. But they do know strong grip correlates with long, healthy life better than anything else. Another one that just shocked the researchers when they found it was push-ups. If you are good at doing push-ups, meaning you've got a reasonable degree of upper body strength, that's great because it correlates with living longer and healthier. And every time they look at a metric, strength compared to healthy aging, strength is always, the stronger, the better and healthier as you grow older. Strength is a huge thing. So everybody needs to train. Everybody. And what you find when you do it's more fun than anything else. It's wonderful.
I think that is a great place to start to wrap up, Kubik, Brooks. And I loved your thing that, if you're not training, start today. It's just that it just sums it up. And I think for, you yourself, you've been involved obviously in training for 55 years, haven't you? So, and today we haven't even really, we won't keep you any longer because I know we've been talking for a while and it's been fantastic. But if there's ever an opportunity down the line to speak again, because I know I'd love, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the evolution of your own training as you've got older, but maybe we won't start on that now. But it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll start to wrap up. Pete, have you got anything you'd like to kind of say as we close?
Of course I have. I mean, honestly, number one, this is why I love doing this podcast, by the way, because we get to go talk to guys like you, Brooks, and you say very much the same thing as everyone else we talk to. And that's not saying it's run of the mill or whatever. It's just, it's simple, consistent, start now, keep going and keep doing it and enjoy it and all of that. Find your thing and do that. And to put it in a kind of like, in a way, an American would put it, it's like the Health Oddity playbook, I suppose, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's just this, it's the same message over and over again. And I absolutely love it. And I was talking to someone this week, actually, on social media. Someone sent me a message saying that they did listen to this, and they said it's really great because it's aimed at a place where people can listen to different episodes and get something different out of each one, which is true. But the actual principle that runs through all of the episodes is exactly what runs through this one, is just just do what you want. Just do what you want to do. And the go for a walk thing, you know, I like I said earlier, I did a video on that today, and I felt like that Papa Swolio fella, if you've ever seen him, because I basically at the end of it, I was like, go for a walk. And, you know, he's normally like, go to the gym. So I felt a bit like him, even though I don't look anything like him. I'm a bit smaller and my hair's not as nice. But anyway, no, that was brilliant. So thank you. Great message. And I love it. So thank you very much.
Mr. Paul Bassett, in your cold, empty shell of a gym.
If he's still there, he's still there.
You're still alive.
Well, that's a kind of direct comparison to my own inner being, cold, dark shell.
Cold, empty shell.
I am an empty shell. Yes. No, I mean, look, I love that. I like geeking out and stuff like this. I've read so many books. And actually, I've used a lot of these techniques and try to infuse them into training clients, because I think a lot of what people did, you know, pre-1960s, you know, or the modern era of training is so useful for people's longevity. You know, a lot of the kind of exercises worked so much with the body, you know, and allowed us to work around. It allows me with a lot of clients to work around issues. I mean, I've even played with things like the light dumbbell system with people with arthritis, with you know, people who didn't have access to equipment, you know, people who were struggling with grip or understanding how to. It's another area which we didn't talk about, which you probably get really, really into, and it's something we've talked about with Paul McElroy, which is, and I certainly understand from reading some of the older texts, you know, from the past, which is the mind-muscle connection. You know, a lot of these people thought they weren't just going through the motions. They weren't just going to the gym. They were truly trying to exercise, and they were seeing it as a development of character, not just on benching or what is the weight. It was like, you know, what is the purpose of this exercise to develop me as an individual? And I think that's why they had such holistic abilities, not only in terms of their physique, but also in terms of their strength and their performance levels. And they did it before there was money involved. Well, certainly significant money, and before there was the same levels of fame that we have now. So a lot of it's just very interesting to see how people develop these levels of skills in somewhat more isolated communities, because we don't have the internet back then. You know, you didn't have TV and phones and stuff like that. So it's been great listening to this, because you've been a massive influence in the industry. You know, I would definitely think those Dinosaur Training books have permeated a lot of gym owners throughout the world, and and that can make a massive influence. Whether or not you see it directly, I certainly think you see it directly. But it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you. The pleasure has been mine.
And Brooks, if people, because like I say, a lot of the people that listen to us, they're not within the industry, they're not trainers, they're kind of people who are looking to increase their own health and strength and longevity. If people, as a result of listening to the podcast, want to follow you and find out more about you and your books and your courses and the kind of training you're doing now, what's the kind of best way for people to do that?
There's two things that I would recommend. The first is go to my website, dinosaurtraining.com, and sign up for my daily emails. You'll get an email with updates on what we're doing, what we're offering, and training tips. So those are very useful. I think people will enjoy that. I have a monthly strength training newsletter called the Dinosaur Files. Sell that in PDF format, and a new issue comes out every month. It's about 20 pages, a lot of good information in each issue. And because a lot of the readers are older, it caters towards older trainees, or at least it always has a lot of information for older trainees. I think people would enjoy that. And the other thing is just follow me on Instagram. I'm out on Instagram under Brooks Kubik, and you can watch the videos of the logs at the beach. And I encourage you to turn up the sound and, hear the wind in the background, get the full effect when you do that.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure talking to you, Brooks. It really has. And I know you've been sitting there at 6 a.m. with your coffee, and you said, I think you're getting ready. You go out at about, what time will you go out and train? About 9 a.m., 10 a.m. this morning?
I'm actually going to probably go out about 11 or 12 o'clock today.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the goal for today. And, you know, we'll hit it during the, hopefully a little bit of sunshine will peep out around noon.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's been listening. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave a review if you're listening on a platform that allows you to do so. And if you'd like to join the the Health Oddity Facebook group, go on to Facebook, go into groups and click on Health Oddity or type in Health Oddity and we will let you in. We will be back next week for our third show of 2023. And as always, thank you for listening. And thank you very much indeed to Brooks for joining us at 6 a.m. From the Pacific Northwest of America. Thank you, Brooks.
Thank you.
Take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.